Welcome back to Small Caps, ladies and gentlemen. As always, my name is Kerry Stevenson. I've asked Keren Paterson, she is the Managing Director of Trigg Mining, ASX code TMG. You may have seen Keren and I speaking in the past about their projects. They're exploring for the essential potassium mineral fertiliser, sulphate of potash, over in Laverton in WA. Now, what is it? It produces the necessary nutrients for agricultural production. And if we don't have food, we don't eat. Bit of an issue. Now, Trigg's got this is important, ladies and gentlemen. They have 100% ownership of 3 projects over there: Lake Throssell, Lake Raisin, and Lake Yo. And I'm sure Keren will correct me if I'm wrong. 3,500 square kilometres, close to energy, close to transport. It's a great project. But before we get into the quarterly update, I really want everybody out there to understand the importance of what Keren's project is going to deliver to Australia, because right now, food prices have never been higher. The trend seems to be that they're going to go higher still. We've got declining soil quality. We've got supply disruptions. We've got distortions in fertilizer supply. Now, where Aussies, a lot of you watching this are, we import 100% of sulphate of potash. That's an issue. Keren's project is in Australia. She's developing it. She understands what it takes to develop it. And here's my bugbear, and I think it is with Keren as well. We're always talking about critical metals. We're always talking about, the electric vehicle revolution. Well, guess what? If we don't have a good food supply, if we don't put the nutrients into the soil to enable the food supply, the agricultural products to be delivered to our supermarkets, then you're all going to be eating terrible sugar products. Sugar is cheap, protein's expensive. We don't want that to happen because you'll get sick. And guess what? The other thing is you can't drive an electric vehicle if you don't have food on the table. So that's my rant, but it's also why I've asked Keren to come back, because she has got so much information. I want you guys to understand why the Trigg mining projects are so important. Rant over, Keren. Good to see you. Welcome back to Small Caps.
Thanks, Kerry. It's quite an introduction.
Well, I am a bit passionate about it because I love the projects that you've got, but I also, you and I were at the Resources Rising Stars conference on the Gold Coast. You did a fantastic presentation, which is why I wanted to bring you back on today, because when I asked the audience at the time how many people learned something from your presentation, 90% of the hands in the room went up. And I think what that told me was there's very little understanding of the critical importance of Trigg mining and what you're doing. So let's start off with your understanding. I really want some of the things that you talked about at that presentation to resonate with our audience so that they understand the market and the importance of what it is that you're doing. So what's your view on the current market forces, and are we getting set for a true food crisis?
Well, perhaps I'll start by talking about the connection between minerals and food.
Fantastic.
And why we need mineral fertilizers in the first place. And our soils, as Kerry has just said, are deficient in the nutrients that plants need to grow. And we've been continuously cropping our arable land for many decades now and trying to produce more and more food to feed an ever-increasing global population. So the only way we can feed that global population is through the use of mineral fertilizers, particularly the primary nutrients of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, NPK. They are critical for plant growth. Without plants, our protein can't eat the plants. We can't eat the plants if we choose to eat vegetables, and we really are going to starve. And that is what has come about in the supply chain disruption when it comes to food, is we are seeing a global food crisis as a result of Russia invading Ukraine.
Okay.
And just this week, we've seen on the news quite important agreement there for Ukraine to be able to export its grain that's been locked up all this time, because there are countries that are desperate for this food. And we can see that in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is in a complete, not a catastrophic situation there. The country has defaulted on its debt. It can't feed its population, and we are seeing the evolution of a food crisis. In Australia, we are seeing that, even though we're really well endowed here with our agricultural output. We can feed all of Australia, and we feed some 60 million odd people around the world from our agricultural output.
Wow.
But critically for Australia, we rely on, particularly when it comes to potassium, imports to be able to produce that food. So without it, it becomes incredibly critical. With Russia and Belarus, its neighbour and friend, producing something around 40% of the world's potash, which is potassium fertiliser, Belarus with direct sanctions on that product and Russia with the financial sanctions against it, we're having a massive supply shock on the potassium fertiliser side of things, which has increased the price. It's doubled the price, which is great for a project like mine, but it increases the cost of food. It increases the cost of inputs to farmers, and they need to pass that on. And a lot of people might not ever be considering electric cars because they only consider how are they going to feed themselves and their family today and tomorrow.
Do you see this, Keren? Is this because a lot of people say, oh, that's fear mongering. It's, we're okay. Although here in Australia, when the price of a head of broccoli gets up to $11, $12 and lettuce is crazy, we're all talking about that. It's not really fear mongering, is it? It's real and it's true. But your project will help, but there's a long way to go. But I guess how quickly can Trigg help to fix this issue, or is it a long way down the road? What do you see as the short, medium, and long-term fixes?
Well, in a very short period of time since listing, Trigg has identified a substantial resource of SOP, and at this stage we've only drilled half of the strike length at the Lake Throssell project, and the Lake Yo project is in the same paleo valley, so the same geological environment. And we have twice the strike length again down there at Lake Yo, and that's just 35 k's to the south. So we've just scratching the tip of what it is that we're looking at there. And the scoping study that we published last year on the 2-year anniversary of listing identified a project that could be potentially a top 10 global producer of sulphate of potash with an initial mine life of 21 years, and that's just on 44% of the deposit so far. That's defined.
And
so it's
your projects are all what we call sulphate of potash, and ladies and gentlemen, for ease of it, I'm going to call it SOP, but there's also muriate of potash. What's the difference? I want people to understand that there is a difference between what they call MOP and SOP, and yours are all SOP.
Yes. We're focusing sulphate of potash because it provides 2 of the 4 macronutrients, potassium and sulfur. So it comes with no deleterious elements, and it's primarily a niche product. We don't have anywhere near enough of this as a natural resource from the brines. That's where it's predominantly found, is in these brine deposits that we're exploring here at Trigg. And to make enough of it to feed current demand, there is this energy-intensive synthetic process that uses muriate, and I'll talk more about that in a second, and it adds sulfuric acid, heats it to around about 800 degrees, and produces a waste product called hydrochloric acid, about 1.2 tonnes of that for every tonne of SOP.
Oh, wow.
Just to meet current demand, because we do not have enough natural resources of sulphate of potash. Now, if we could meet the entire demand for potassium fertiliser with SOP, we would, and farmers would, because it doesn't impact their soils, and it is a really safe and very efficient fertiliser. So they're not transporting waste elements as they would in muriate of potash. Muriate of potash is 50% chloride, and that is an acid. It contributes to acidity in the soil. And
got it. So I just had one of those light bulb moments where I went, acidic soil, that's a problem.
Very much so. It kills off all the microorganisms. Plants need the microorganisms because that's what makes the minerals bioavailable for them. And we really would prefer farmers to use SOP because it would enhance the sustainability of soils. By putting muriate of potash on, farmers are contributing to the salinity, to the acidity, and they're having to counteract that with other chemicals to try and balance the soils out. So it's not an ideal product, but it's an abundant product. Canada, Russia and Belarus are the world's largest producers of muriate. It's about an 80 million tonne per annum market, with the SOP market about 8. But as I said, if we could supply it all with SOP, I expect we would, because farmers would choose not to use the fluoride if it was priced the same, where SOP is priced at a premium over muriate.
We like that. Keren, you've just come out with your quarterly report. This is an investor audience. Could you just give us some of the highlights of that quarterly report? And I think pretty happy with it?
Very happy with it. We've been working away at the PFS on the study, so the pre-feasibility study. We've been also looking at ways to shore up the project and de-risk it. So one of the aspects of sulphate of potash is it's fantastic. It uses solar energy through evaporation. So there's no open pit, there's no big rock waste dump. We'll be pumping water out of the ground, harvesting the deposit without interrupting the geological deposition process, putting the water into solar evaporation ponds and using solar energy. But that also leaves it really open to the environment. And that's what we're experiencing, and we're seeing some issues with that part of the process, or the final part of the evaporation process in 2 of the projects in Western Australia that are in the commissioning phase. And we're looking at ways that we can get more control over that final part of the process, because the evaporation process is about producing essentially the ore body that we're going to put through the process plant to then refine and finalise the sulphate of potash ready for the farmers at the end of the process. So there's quite a long period of time to do that, and we're looking at ways that we can speed that up and de-risk it and make sure that we've got more confidence in that process than what we're seeing there with the other projects. Excuse me. We also have, we've done a heritage survey at Lake Throssell for the field season, so that we're very excited. The geologists are out there now in the field getting the tracks and everything ready for this year's field program. We'll be drilling some air core holes, and the primary purpose of those holes is to finalise the location of the water bores, and that will then give us an opportunity to pump test the basal aquifer. We've already pump tested the superficial aquifer, the bit that sits inside the lake bed itself. This is targeting the bit down the bottom, which is really, really big glacial valley. It's about 6 kilometres wide, and we've drilled it about 35 kilometres so far within the Lake Throssell tenements. So this is about getting absolute confidence in our pump rate, and all of that information will go through to the PFS that we'll publish, and we anticipate publishing next year.
Is there 2 questions? Look, now I'm coughing. It must be translating over the miles. Keren, is there, given this is critical, is there a way to speed up the process? Because it does take a while, and I picked up on something you said earlier, that sort of that final process, it's almost like the final mile is the critical mile. Is there a way, do you think that's where people are a bit hesitant and saying, I wonder if the process can, if they can go that final mile, if you like? Do you understand what I'm saying with that? It's kind of like, is there a way to speed it up, or is it really important to go slow and steady so that at the end of the day, you have a proper process that people can be confident?
Oh, I think there is a proper process when it comes to engineering, design and de-risking a project, to make sure that when we spend much bigger chunk of shareholder funds in construction phase, that we're doing it right and we're doing it cost effectively. So that we do need to go through the process of scoping the project, then doing a pre-feasibility study, then a feasibility study, before we move into the higher end of the project and the confidence to go into a final investment decision. time and time again in the industry for many decades now that I have been in it, every time I've seen a project that's cut one of those parts of the puzzle out, it always comes back to bite, particularly shareholders. So I'm really particular about being sure of what it is that we do, going through this study phase when our overheads are much, much lower, and not going through the pain that we are seeing with some of the other projects that are learning on the fly. And it's all part of also establishing a new industry. These are skills that we haven't ever had in Australia. We're developing a new industry, but it's an incredibly important industry, as we've talked about, because it's vital for agricultural output. So we need to invest in this and we need to do it. And we do need to get it right. So we need to learn the lessons of those before us and put together an A team. And in fact, someone just external described my team to me as being the A team yesterday. The technology people, the experience that I have on the team is second to none. And we are learning the lessons from those going before us so that we can make sure that we are really building a solid project that we are really going to be proud of.
Keren, why is it that we're sitting here talking in 2022 and it's a new industry? Why is that? Why has it? Because it sounds to me, you've got 3,500 square kilometres, 3 projects, 100% owned for Trigg. Why are we talking in 2022 that this is a new sector? Because it's vital.
We're looking for minerals that are already dissolved in water. And in Australia, we've never really done that before. We only look for things inside rock predominantly, or some other things like mineral sands in sand and coal. But as a miner from the School of Mines in Kalgoorlie, that's pretty much all I learned, was how to go and blast things and keep things safe in the process of doing that and shifting a lot of rock. This project is very much about the water, and our processing method is using solar evaporation, which is much more agricultural in its process than it is mining. We talk about harvesting, we talk about growing, we grow the salts, and before it all goes into that process plant. And the process plant really is using water and temperature to get the right crystal structure in the salt, which it then becomes the sulphate of potash or potassium sulphate and the fertiliser for food.
I'm talking to you at the end of July 2022. Give us some timelines, some, I guess, step back, big picture timelines for investors to have that aha moment that there are some timelines that you're going to be hitting.
Well, first step, or the biggest milestone coming up for us will be the PFS. But in the meantime, we'll be doing some drilling, assay results coming out of that. Each time you do that, you de-risk your resource. The water bores, getting those in and established. We've also got a large evaporation trial underway now, and that will then take us through, all the way through to producing sulphate of potash early next year for talks with offtake partners and the like. And that will also design our process flow sheet for the second part of that process. So we've completed the CITA test already this year, and then that has guided us into that bulk evaporation trial. So as we're working on these alternative process pathways that we're exploring, we're also looking at the base case and making sure that we'll deliver the project at that level, and we have the base case to compare back to when we're looking at potentially new technology to de-risk the process as well.
I love the way that you're very systematic about the way you're going through this, because it can be challenging and you're like, no, we're not going to rush it. We're going to get through it. Now, corporately, there's about 170 million shares on issue. Is that correct? Because I like that. It's not like you don't have 1 billion shares on issue. You listed a couple of years ago. You're very cautious and careful with shareholder funds. Is the government supportive of what you're doing? Are you going to be getting some support from a funding point of view? This is a big project.
It is a big project, and I would like to see more support in the likes of being critical. What I find a little bit frustrating is that potassium as a fertiliser is not considered critical when battery metals are. And, it's essential. We need to make sure that we create this industry, a robust industry, to support our agricultural sector here in Australia and overseas, so that we can continue to enhance food security, so that we're not seeing headlines focused on food insecurity. So that is incredibly important to me, that we can we can do that as Australia. This is an Australian company with an Australian project. Let's do it for Australia.
And you know what? Everything is mined or grown. And if you don't have the fertilizer, you can't grow the food. It's how I started this whole conversation with Keren. Excuse me. Why is it that you think, given agriculture is such an important part of Australia's economy, why do you think that the government hasn't, I guess, looked at this as a critical part of the supply chain?
I'm not sure. I think that we are going to become more and more aware of this. The US government earlier this year, after the Russia invasion of Ukraine, announced $250 million to be spent this year to support the domestic fertilizer industry.
Okay.
Brazil as well. Brazil is incredibly dependent on external fertilizers for its agricultural sector, and it is looking at ways to enhance and develop a domestic fertilizer industry. So I think it's a matter of time when we sort of the trends change. If we're all focused on batteries and cars at the moment, there will be a time when the $12 broccoli and the $10 cabbage and the cabbage gate at KFC is going to hurt.
Yeah, and maybe what we should do is send this conversation to the agricultural minister. Maybe we'll just say to him, listen, have a look at this. This is what we need to be supporting. Keren, we're running out of time. It's an investor audience out here. We've talked about the quarterly report. We've talked about what you're doing. The next step will be the PFS, and that you'll be coming out with product early next year. Give me 3 reasons why right now, because we spoke 2 months ago, but you've come further forward on this. Why right now is a great time for investors to sit up and take notice?
Well, I think the first one from an investor perspective is an independent analyst report that was published last week, and that gives a price target which suggests that Trigg's at the bottom of that price target range right now. This is a really important product for global food security, for Australia's food security. It is a big deposit, a big discovery, a greenfields discovery. It is very exciting to be doing this, and we intend to build it economically, efficiently, and for shareholders and for Australians.
Keren, I can't finish off without having you do that. You know, what is it? The making mines that communities are proud of. What's that line that you always use? It's not coming to my mind straight away, but let's finish off with that because it's important.
Well, that was the foundation of Trigg Mining, and that is to build mines communities can be proud of.
There you go. Building mines that communities can be proud of, but also building a project that allows all of us to be able to get proper food supply in a clean and sustainable way. Keren Paterson, Managing Director of Trigg Mining, thanks for joining me on Small Caps today, and all the best.
You too, Kerry. Thanks for having me.